of matrices, right? Improve, resulting in 1% exact match improvement, or latency 2x latency reduction. So those tends to be some action verb or some quantitative measures that demonstrate why things work, or maybe not why, but what did you do? So that is super helpful. And also listed out academic achievements, which is, I guess it's a good filler. Because usually if it's academic achievement, if you win any competition, or you get on Dean's list, or you know, et cetera, those are good. Excellent grades. I don't know what's typical like things that people do there, but I think it's good. And then it listed out the course project that might be relevant to the position that he's targeting. So I think overall, this is a fairly good resume for a new grad or expected graduation.
I see. What do you think, Carl?
Yeah. Again, just gonna echo this disclaimer. All thoughts that I present here on my own don't reflect the thoughts of my employer or are related to the, you know, hiring process of my employer. But I think this resume does a couple of cool things. One, it really demonstrates impact in a very condensed way. So if, as Han said, like you can see 1% EM improvement, latency reduction, you have a bunch of numbers, you have, you know, what techniques were used. And another really cool thing that this person does is they actually use bolding to draw the eye to specific metrics, techniques, or things that they did. So you could see like they bold the, you know, the title, they bold, you know, essentially what they did, and they bold other important things. So for example, in academic achievements, they bold rank 42 JE advanced scores. Which I think is a very intelligent thing to do, in my opinion, because especially if the reader has minimal time, 10 seconds. The first thing that they're going to do is just do a quick scan of the paper, and bold text really hits the eye quickly. So if there's something that you want people to see, having that bold text is usually a good idea. That being said, with respect to the bold text, I definitely think that like you could have bolded the impact, the quantitative impacts of your work.
That's what I was thinking.
And then in terms of formatting, I definitely think that although the academic achievements are really good, usually I like to see like course projects and work experience prioritized over everything, because it's usually like a demonstration of like what you've done practically, and rather than the academic sense, which I think in industry is maybe more important. And
that is,
sorry.
I think it's very interesting, because I would say this, like different people would like prioritize academic achievements or course projects differently. For me, like, personally, for example, like I would, for me, I feel like course project are less interesting, because I have seen a lot of students project, and I think a pattern match, a lot of them are just like similar, like very the same. So unless I see like something that really, really stands out, I would just like skip it.
Yeah, I mean, you could also, I mean, this person does a really good job of like condensing their work experience, but they have four work experiences. That you definitely could like expand further. Like if there's a sentence that you cut because you know you wanted to fit a course project, it might be better to just cut some of the course projects and instead elucidate more on what you did at each of these research internships.
I see.
And then right at the bottom we have I think skills and abilities. I think that like demonstrating your skills and abilities is important, and you know maybe it helps with automatic resume screening. I can't speak to that, but generally I like to see those more embedded with respect to the projects you did and where you learned them, rather than you know just a list.
So like this, like they will have it in each of this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I see. Okay, yeah. So I think for me, I do think it's a pretty good resume. I do think that I feel like the last session could be cut out. And I do think that's like, even though there's a lot of cost project and a lot of like, it's just a lot of like project A, B, C, D, I think in total, right, from both the courses and the work experience, they are about like 10 different ones. I think I would rather see a resume with like not 10, but like 3. But then like I get more out of each of them. So like all of this like is just, I think like affiliated 1, 2, and 3, like the rest is it's like diminishing return for me. I'm not sure if I could like continue like diving deep into later. So I would say that's like it's a pretty good resume, and would probably like get to the next interview route. Yeah, but I think so. One risk of it in the interview route is that because there's so many different projects, there's a chance for the interviewer to just pick one project that you're not really strong about. So like if there's a way for you to like just like highlight maybe like top 3 project, and the interviewer can just like pick any of the top 3, then it will be much better positioned in the interview round. Yeah.
So one strategy I have seen when you're applying for jobs is that for your course projects, you could have, let's say, if you have done, let's say, 5 projects, right?
Yeah.
Of different kind, you put them in a bank of some sort, and you are applying for, let's say, for example, a NLP job, you put the NLP project in, or when you're applying for a CV job, you put the CV projects in. So you have a more centered and more in-depth discussion about that project, instead of listing 10, but every single one is really, really short. Because I would imagine if you go to a technical interview, we're going to screen through, we're going to read really quickly through the resume and see, okay, well, I'll probably pick a course project or a work experience that's related to what you're expected to work in the field. So that way you can have, so then if you, instead of listing 10 short course project, you list 2 or 3 with more depth, then we can have a more fruitful discussion on the projects. Because at the end of the day, all this on your resume is to help the interviewer understand you as a candidate and pick icebreaker or pick interesting discussions. So you don't want to have projects you're not too familiar with on your resume, and you want to be able to show in-depth technical understanding with your projects.
I see. So I agree with you. So I think that also depends on like the interviewer strategy. So I've seen resume when there are a lot of like keywords, for example, like B2B algorithm, BERT model, pattern mining, like mention like active learning methods. So like if I interview, like I would, so like it depends on the interviewer, right? They would choose a keyword. I have seen a lot of cases like when the resume is very impressive and mentions it knows everything. And they pick and say, hey, explain to me like B2B algorithm, how it works. And they would be like, I don't know, like they just use some like prepackaged, and it shows me like very lack of curiosity. Like you see something and you use it, but you never really bother to learn what it is. So that is usually like a red flag. So I think I'm like consistent with a resume with a lot of like keywords, because no one can be like that good at everything. But maybe it's just me. Okay. So I think like the Troy has a question. How relevant are course projects if there are 5+ years of work experience? What do you think, Kai?
I would keep it to, I mean, if you have 5 years of work experience, in my opinion, you probably have enough to fill a page without course projects. And because of that, it seems like what you have to think about the opportunity cost, right? So what is the opportunity cost of including course projects, especially if they're not really relevant to what you want to be working on? If you could be including more information about something that you've been doing for 5 years or some really interesting other thing that you're doing, then it's probably not worth to include them. If you need filler, maybe they're worth it. Maybe the course project relates directly to something that you're working on, and then it becomes like a valuable proposition to include it, but it becomes sort of a trade-off of opportunity cost of space, right? Because you usually want your resume to fit into a single page.
So yeah, I think like opportunity cost is a good point. So I have seen that actually I seen one resume that was really impressive. It's someone who mentions their master thesis. It was like 5 years ago, but then it's still being like cited, like, and a lot of people are like looking at it become a foundational work for a field. And I saw it's like, this is really impressive. So I think like that's something I feel like you should include in the resume. But at the same time, including, I see there are two aspects of it. One is that I was thinking of it as experiences or like project or impact as a maybe recency bias. So yes, like something 5 years ago, like you have two projects. One is like equally impactful. So if you show it's like it's one as like 5 years ago, one way we could see it as like, oh, that's really impressive. You did that when you were still a student, and you were able to achieve something very cool when you were like new in the field. But at the same time, it has another aspect is that like, okay, if it was a best project, this means that you picked 5 years ago, and there was no progressions from 5 years ago until today. What do you think, Han?
Yeah, I think I think that's a very good question. I think at the end of the day, a resume is going to be your landing page. So you want to make sure that the projects that you listed on your resume is going to be targeted towards the position you want to apply for. Let's say, for example, if you currently work as a backend engineer, but you did some machine learning projects at school or off work, then you want to list it and you want to transition into machine learning engineering, then it's, by all means, put it up there just so that you can show you have some experiences for machine learning. So it's basically just make sure everything is and is targeted towards the position you want to apply for. So if you want to apply for, let's say, a CEO position, you want to list out all your leadership activities from Boy Scouts all the way to, like, I guess, leading a team somewhere. Yeah. But if you want to apply for a research position, list out more research-related work experiences and academic experiences. So make sure, as long as it's targeted, it's good.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, okay. That's my 2 cents.
I see. Yeah, or you can, like, if you did one like project 5 years ago and you did anything with machine learning for 5 years, you can still list it and say have 5 years of experience because you did the first project 5 years ago. It's the job. Don't do that. Okay, let's go to the next resume. So this is also like someone who graduated in December 2020, so like 2 years of experience. So what is the first impression? Oh, shoot. I think I didn't, anyhow, I didn't clear out the PII. So let's go to the next resume. Okay, he said he's cool with it. Nice. Cool. So what is the first impression of this resume?
Thank you. Thank you for being generous. So from the first impression, 2020 graduation, so it's almost 2 years or around 2 years. That's 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, so this candidate has graduated 2 years ago, and yet still having the school at the very top of the resume. So generally speaking, I think the same thing with Rex's or UI UX design, whatever that's towards the top is the most important, which means this candidate is believing having the master's from Columbia data science is more important or more impressive than doing machine learning software engineering at Etsy, which I think is some sort of a conflict. So in my opinion, I think having the ML engineering experience at Etsy is a lot more impressive and a lot more hands-on than a master degree. from whatever college that could be. So there is a slight disconnect between the importance of the rank, right? Like at the end, we're trying to rank what's the most impressive to the top and what's the least impressive to the bottom.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I see is it is not exactly quantifying or mentioning a lot of the things that has been achieved. So there is certain things like ML models, A/B testing, etc., etc. But what is the actual result? Like what happened? That's not too clear. So that's the first two things I would see from this resume.
So I think I really like what you said about thing is a narrative, right? So first thing you see, because that person's graduated like in 2020, 2 years ago. So the first question you are like, what have you been doing since then? And exactly you go choose this essay. And I do think there's one thing that's a good signal for me is like the person was an intern at essay and got a return offer as a full-time. So I think that's usually a positive signal. What do you think, Kai? I see you nodding.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, what Han said is true. There's no I'm sure that like this person has impact because, again, the return offer and, much stuff. It's just not really evident from these lines what the impact is. Another thing that I might add is there are actually a couple things. The first thing I'd add is that if you look at the beginning of every line for Etsy and SIG-tuple technologies, use the word developed a lot. And having that parallel of a structure is often not a good sign in terms of, not a good sign. It's just harder to read because it's like the same line over and over and over. Human eyes generally sort of gloss over stuff that is the same pattern. So if you have the same pattern for multiple lines in a row, that's usually there's a risk of it being glossed over.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
There was one other thing. And this is my pet peeve. You have a slight tense mismatch in your Etsy entry. So you have developing and developed. I know that makes sense. But usually in your resume, it makes more sense to keep the tense consistent throughout all the entries. And I do realize that in this case, it does mean that you are currently developing versus you previously developed in this job. But to me personally, it makes more sense to have keep everything past tense.
So how relevant do you think the research assistants here, position was from 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
Oh, I actually tend to think of research publications as pretty I don't know, publication usually means that they worked on something for a long time. It depends on where it was published as well, but to me, I would keep it for a while because it's something that they can reference not only for your just your technical ability, but also your critical thinking work. Generally, paper writing is a good measure of critical thinking. So I'd actually think that that's pretty high up there for things that I'd like to include for a long time.
I see. So so to talking about so you mentioned that it depends on whether papers was published, right? So that's something I've seen that some candidates do well, or it could be helpful is that can they say mention where it's published and say how selective that journal or conference, because maybe a recruiter doesn't know, is not familiar with it, and there will frankly there are a lot of journals that pay to get published or just not really great journals. So it really depends on where. So if you can provide some information, just say how good the journal is, that would be very helpful. One thing I do think about this resume is, I'm not sure it's reasonable to expect is to have more personal. So for example, I saw a candidate who said that person's swam 30 miles across something. It's as personal activity, and wow, it's like really show great. So I feel like if the candidate has some things like in the personal life outside of just, or like anything they have done that like show just perseverance, like persistence, that I do think that is good. I haven't seen that a lot in a lot of resume. Should we move to the next resume? Han, do you want anything to add?
Yeah, one last quick thing I would like to add is that, say, for example, there are a mix of different academic experience and industry experience in the list of experiences. Ideally, I think it would be better to separate those two out. So the research and the TA experience, that should be, let's say, academic. Those tend to be more academic experience. And if you need, for the experience at Etsy, I don't know what performance evaluation process they use, but if they use any sort of OKR, et cetera, or GPS, you should have enough material and if enough material from your brag sheet so you can fill those in.
I see.
As part of the resume, right? So, yeah.
I think that's a good point about like the composition of like academic versus professional. I do think that from this resume, right? I think it's like only a quarter is on work experience and the rest related to the academic, which also make, I think so. So back to the point Han said about the resume being the front page. So now here from this composition, I would imagine just like the academic work, coursework makeup, like it's still the most important factor even after like 2 years of graduation. Cool. Shall we move to the next resume? Okay, so I think this is the last resume. We didn't see a lot of numbers on impact, and here I think this resume has a lot of these numbers. So, Kai, what do you think?
Yeah, so I guess just to start with, right? This paper does a really good job of terminalizing impact this resume does a really good job of terminalizing impact because they literally say impact, like they literally spell out explicitly what the impact of their work was. Impact achieved 90% efficiency gains, increased revenue, led team of 9, basically like it shows what they did specifically and what the impact was, and the quantitative impacts are like relatively high magnitude, which I think it's great to highlight that. That being said, I definitely could see the technique we saw in the first resume, like bolding being employed here. Like it would definitely be good to use. And I'm not, as Han said, right, you want to lead with your most important stuff first. I'm not a huge fan of having skills as the first section. If you scroll all the way to the top, there's a skills section. I understandably, right, it's a good summary of what you are, but I don't know, it just seems like those are prioritized over your work experience. Like there's awesome work experience right here that would be great to lead with, in my opinion.
I agree. I also think it's like the equation is pretty impressive. I would say the first thing I would note is the progressions, like a year, you go from data scientist to senior, and then 2 more years, or less than a year and a half to take lead. So I think I would definitely want to learn more about like how that happened.
I think I completely agree with Kyle that the skills should not be up top because your experience as a tech lead, it's much more important than Python, PySpark, or Spark, or whatever you know what to use. One thing that I think could be slightly improved on this already pretty good resume is there is career progression at the from data scientist to senior to tech lead, but in the bullet points, I would love to see your last bullet point in team leading as the first bullet point for that position. Because if, let's say, for example, you are applying for a team lead or a staff level position, then people would be expecting to see more about the impact you have driven within your organization versus individual tasks you have done. So I think that would help to propel this resume forward.
I agree. So I think this question from Chloe. Do you think something like results data and ML pipelines left co-production challenge is too vague?
Yeah, that in my opinion, that is too vague. And the reason is, if you were to really investigate what that tells you, like what that tells me is you worked on getting lab to production working, and that's kind of it. And that could be anything, right? That could involve any technology. That could be, you know, making a Jupyter notebook into a script, right? Like that doesn't tell us anything about what you actually did, just like the general idea of what you did, the vague idea of what you did.
Yeah, I see. What do you think about the resume gap?
Sorry?
What do you think about the resume gap?
I think from my standpoint, I don't really care. But I know perhaps certain HR or compliance from the HR side, they might care about, why is there a gap here and there when they, I guess, do the background checks, et cetera, et cetera. But from a hiring perspective on my end, it's not exactly a big concern to me, because nowadays people could take off work, take time off work for whatever reasons. So that is not exactly a big red flag.
Yeah.
One other note that, oh, sorry.
And yes, I agree with Kyle that on the impact, the last point is usually we want to measure the impacts. And for example, in DevOps, we can measure things using DORA metrics, like your time to production, time to recovery, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So we usually want to have some measurable impact at your job. Otherwise, if we just say we improved, we don't know what was the original, etc., or what is the improved state, etc., etc. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
There's one last note from here. I actually just read through. I'm pretty sure that the work experience contains literally everything in the skills section. So in my opinion, the skills section is a little bit redundant.
We have decided that Kai doesn't like skills section. I agree with you. I usually find that not very, very helpful, because I have a lot of people list things, and when we drill deeper, and it's just like, yeah, I'm aware of the existence of that skill set. But so you could suggest that we just remove the skill.
Yep.
And will you agree?
There is one notable exception. Well, maybe notable. Like, one thing that doesn't come out in your resume is if you speak like a language that's not English. For example, like the most common one I've seen is like if you speak Mandarin. And there are teams that are like, you know, there's a dev team in China for this, you know, for this company you're applying to. It may be suitable to say that you are like a native Mandarin speaker, or you know Mandarin, or, you know, same for any other language, but you know, that's the one that I've seen most commonly.
Yeah, Also, I think it's somebody found it but like I feel irritating when people mention too many libraries.
I think from my standpoint for skills, personally, I don't like it, but I do see it being useful if there's like a tiny section at the very bottom to help HR professionals screen things out, because they tend not to be as technical. They understand a lot of words, keywords, so they're just trying to really quickly screen for the keywords. So that might be helpful to them, but that's not an area I've been exposed in too much. But yeah.
I also feel like there are like certain I think like hard skill set. I think like what is easily learned, then maybe it's not worth mentioning. First of all, I feel like pandas, NumPy. I don't think they are very like that difficult or that unusual. Like if you have been working in data scientist for several years and you don't know how to use them, that's a better red flag than. So I was like part of the assumptions. Shall we move to the next resume? Okay. Wait, that is very weird when it doesn't just cover the first. So what do you think of this resume?
There's another PII issue. Yeah, I don't know why it keeps doing that.
Wait, I think it's like it takes a while for it to like cover. Does this cover now? Does it show now? Or still show info?
That is covered too.
Yeah. So one thing I would say, I think the first thing that I saw the resume is like aspiring data scientist with 2 years experience as a data analyst. What do you think about using the words like aspiring?
I think that the professional summary gives a good sense of like where you want to move into and what skills you currently have. I don't know. Usually the summary I found is useful if you are like changing domains. And I think that's why it's being used here and probably used to moderately good effect. That being said, right, like if you just have a summary for stuff that is self-evident in your resume,
I'm
not sure that that's valuable, right? Like it, again, like a lot of resume design comes down to opportunity cost. Like what are you not including because you're including something, or what are you doing because you're including something? So I would probably, in this case, since it does seem to be someone trying to switch into data science, or not really based on the work experience. Yeah, I wouldn't say aspiring data scientist, right? I actually don't, in this case, I'm not sure that the professional summary is necessary, because it's pretty obvious that this person likes to work or is interested in working in data science and has worked in data science before.
Yeah, from my standpoint, a couple of things jumps out right away. First is aspiring versus are you, if you're doing data science, doesn't matter if it's in a professional setting or a nonprofit or other settings, you are a data scientist, right? You don't want to be aspiring. Aspiring means you're not there. Then people don't care if you're not there. And 2 years of experience where that does not line up with the work experiences. I see there's a segment of experience from 17 to 19, and then there's some internship from June of this year till now. So that said, the 2 year plus experience, that doesn't really line up. Experience is usually when we want to measure it in relevancy, not in your age. So if I am, 40 years old and I work for 18 years, I wouldn't say I have 18 years of experience. That grows with age. We want to see progression in responsibility or progression in other spaces. Then the second thing that jumps out is there's 2 pages, and I'm guessing this is a new grad resume. So there is definitely a lot of condensation to do. Specifically, the technique I mentioned earlier, where you only include your relevant projects on your resume for that specific job. That would greatly help reducing the amount of redundant.
I see. I think we are commenting about the colors. I think that's several people have very strong opinion about the use of green and red. What are the thoughts?
I am colorblind. I only see red for whatever reason. So that's the more color. So usually in a more formal setting, or in a more usually the more color you use in a document, the less formal it is. Typically. So if something that's really, really formal is usually gold, maybe gold and black, etc., etc. So try to reduce the number of colors. Try not to be too imaginative or too creative with their resume, unless you are doing UX or front end or something.
So I think I see that this person is someone who is trying. So they started with something that's not related to data science, like studying petroleum. And then they work at data analyst. And I think they study more and to become and work as data scientist. So that person is, I would say, is very proactive in looking out for things. So what would be the advice? Because clearly this person is not the typical study computer science, data scientist. So that person is trying to get more job in data science. So what would be the advice to make their resume stronger?
My take is, possibly removing the professional summary, increasing the impact of the work experience a little bit more. Again, I'm not sure that skills is incredibly important, but I would get the publications on page 1. I would actually fit it into one page. That's my first piece of advice, because again, sometimes if you only have 5 to 10 seconds to read a resume, and that's of course in the very low case, you're not going to see any of this stuff, and honestly, some of these are pretty relevant. So
I agree. So you're saying this should first remove these sections, and imagine you want to remove the skill section as well, but then move this relevant project up and maybe condense everything to fit into one page.
So first thing first, condense everything into one page. Second is use the one page. Better utilize your real estate. So professional summary, probably not as needed. In terms of career progression, I think this is a fairly good resume. It shows that there is a data analytic experience, and this candidate has been working interning for data science. So there is career progression, and the transition is quite successful already. And so if it's me, I would reduce the skill session to not take up a quarter or 1/5 of a page, and put in the relevant projects. The summary, in my honest opinion, I would let it go. Because that's not exactly helpful. So more relevant projects to the position that you're applying. Let's say, for example, if you're applying a lot to quant firms or financial risk or banking firms, then your financial risk modeling experience could be up there. The project could be demonstrated up there, right? And there are also I remember there is sentiment analytics. So if you're applying to, let's say, Amazon, eBay, Etsy, you can include that sentiment analysis of product reviews up on the resume. Pick and choose whatever that's relevant and utilize your real estate properly, instead of just expanding it to 2 or 3 pages. It is absolutely not needed, especially if you are still a early career professional, 2 pages, that's like way too much.
So if we had to choose like 2 or 3 projects out of this, which one would you choose, like out of this 5?
Depends on the position, but one I would probably not choose is the sentiment analysis, because I think that is a very tired project. It's as common as using the iris dataset. And if there is any stock price prediction, don't do that, please, ever. Those are really tired projects that you see that towards data science. There's at least a dozen new like sentiment analysis on there as well. So
I think I just saw the chat. I think Kai is talking about something very relevant about like templated Kaggle projects, like Iris, Titanic. So Kai, I guess, you want to just share it?
Yeah, no, I mean, my opinion is that projects are a good way to demonstrate, like, especially if you're crossing domains, projects are a really good way to demonstrate crossing domains. But the probability that someone is going to look at your projects, if it's obviously a templated project or a project that everyone has done, or most people have done, or most people have seen before, it's often not, people often don't take the opportunity to take a look. So for example, like the pedal data set or sepal data set or the Titanic data set, unless there's something really interesting about the project, like, oh yeah, like I have the #1 submission on the Titanic data set, which would be super cool. I don't know anyone who has that, but if you have something like that, it's good to include. But if it's just like, oh, I gained this much accuracy on the Titanic data set, it's like that doesn't immediately draw the eye. But if like someone's like, oh yeah, like I used diffusion to generate like music, for example, off of Mel spectrograms, that's actually a new paper called Refusion. Stuff like that is usually like, wow, like I actually want to read, like this is a paper that I want to read, so like I'll go read your project.
So like bring up some things that the person reading the resume might be interested in and might want to know more about.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's asking about like, tell me about the Titanic dataset experience, or tell me the experience by loading the review. Okay. I'm not saying it's like, I think that's a point. A point about time. I think we are like at time. Shall we conclude the sessions here?
I think there's one last question I wanted to answer. Adib asks, hi, I don't have too much experience as a professional, but I have GitHub projects and open source contributions. How can I show them on your resume? Include them in relevant projects or contributions. I actually think that open source contributions, especially to like very big, important libraries, are actually a pretty good way to get noticed, especially if you become a member of the maintainer team. So
I think it doesn't have to be big and important. For me, like, I think I love it when candidates show me link to their most, like, what's the PRs, the thing that they're most proud of. So basically you can save a lot of time. So you can just like read their PRs, and that's a very strong signal for me.
Yep.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's a great point. Open source contributions are great. Especially, and I know this isn't the case for a lot of people, but especially if like the team that is hiring works with the library that you've done contributions on, odds are they probably consume some of your changes. And that's a good thing, right? Like if you're going to start a conversation about like, oh, like I worked on this, and they say, oh, well, we're using this, like, what'd you do? And you can talk about, you can highlight your expertise and, or, knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think there are some general questions about, resume tips for people going to career change from engineering to AI ML. I think that there's a lot of variations of those, right? So let's say, for example, if you are an engineering lead going to, leading from backend engineering to AI ML engineering, there's not that much difference in terms of your career resume tip. But if you are, let's say, in a IC track and you want to switch from engineering to AI/ML, definitely list your current or somewhat relevant projects up top, so people can understand, what you have tried, etc., etc. But I think generally it depends. And to make your resume stronger, definitely find some open source opportunities, etc., etc. Do your projects, or find different ways to move your current experience into more AI/ML related subjects.
Yeah. Actually, in the interest of time, this is a question I think I want to ask. What are the views on including pictures in the resume?
I actually have to drop momentarily, but quick answer. My opinion on pictures is that there's an opportunity cost. Unless there's a very specific reason why you want to include a picture takes up space that can be used for other.
Picture of yourself, like profile picture.
I would not include it personally, because it doesn't add anything to your resume, right? Like what it just seems like it's like to make it pretty, I guess maybe is a reason. But I would probably say that, in my opinion, there's a distinct opportunity cost to including your picture, because that's taking up space that could be used by text or, the rest of your resume.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Kyle. I want to drop off. Yeah.
Thanks, Kyle. From my perspective, make sure you are aware of the local customs or the customs of the company you are applying to. So from my experience, I know companies in Japan, China, etc. They might want to have your profile picture, and in the US specifically, where I have most of my experiences in, is that you don't.
I lost. I think you're on mute.
Oh, yeah. So in the US, you don't ever want to have your profile picture on your resume, but perhaps in certain countries, it is expected. So be mindful of sending a resume that's catered to one type of country to another. So let's say if you are not expected and you should not have profile picture on your resume in the US, try not to use that same resume and apply to a job in a country that requires a profile picture. So just be mindful of those.
Yeah, I agree. I think, definitely understand the customer's geolocation of the companies that you're applying to. So, okay, I think we are at time here. I didn't get to go through every resume, but thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, really, Han, for making time. I think I'm learning a ton from this.
Thank you so much, all. Hopefully it's helpful. It's, I guess, IMHO. So
yeah, if you have more questions, feel free to post on Discord. We have a channel called Career Advice. So please do post a question there, and which somebody will answer. See ya.